Yeah, transformation is an effectual outcome, right? That lasts, that's sustained through time. And let me contrast it with, well, let me say first that all transformation is identity change.
Interesting.
All transformation is identity change. You're either enhancing some level of identity or expanding some level of identity that you already have, some aspect of identity, I should say, or you're gaining a new aspect of identity, right? And which I often say is like, I was X, now I am Y, right? As a way, I'm a math major, so I talk in parameters, right? So I was X, now I was Y, right? There are transitions in state that don't rise to the level of a transformation. So if I was cold, but now somebody helped me be warm. If I was hungry, I went to a restaurant, and now I am satiated. Right? Those are transitions in state. Right? They don't last. They're not really an identity change. Right? So it is a change in identity is the way to think about it.
Welcome back to the Trusted Guide podcast. What if serving customers well isn't really about understanding what they want? It's about understanding who they want to become. That's the question at the heart of this conversation, and it fundamentally challenges everything we know about being customer-centric. This episode also marks a personal milestone. It's the first guest interview since transitioning from the Delighted Customers podcast after over 160 episodes and a 7-month break, now with a more focused lens on leading change when you don't have budget or positional authority. Here on the Trusted Guide podcast, I can't think of a better guest to kick us off in this new era than Joe Pine. Many of you know Joe from The Experience Economy, the book that changed how organizations think about value creation that he wrote 27 years ago. Now he's back with the transformation economy, an argument that he makes may be even more profound. Here's my conversation with Joe Pine. I am so incredibly excited to have back on the show Joe Pine. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Yay. Joe is, in my opinion, he's one of the key people in creating the term customer experience. And it was based on his book called The Experience Economy way back when. From that last podcast, and I encourage you to go back and listen to it, my discussion with Joe back then, I utilized that information for a number of things, including the course I taught at Michigan State University. We used clips of that to educate and inform the Masters of Science in Customer Experience Management students. And so, Joe, thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
And we hope to use this again. I'm working on some other stuff. I'll be teaching at Loyola University in Maryland in the fall, and hopefully some of what we come into, what we bring up, what we shed light on today will be included in some of their assignments. Yeah. So, Joe, The Experience Economy was an amazing book. I consider you a visionary, someone who is able to take things that exist around us and simplify them in a way that even I can understand.
Make it simple enough that your mother can understand. So I'm glad that you and my mother are alike in that regard.
Yeah. And so going way back to the cavemen, I'm looking at, this is page 3 of the new book called The Transformation Economy. And by the way, the subtitle, Guiding Customers to Achieve Their Aspirations. And going back to the first book, you kind of build off that where you say the progression of economic value is a model that you use to help explain how our economy has evolved from extracting commodities to making goods to delivering services to staging experiences, and now this most recent one to guiding transformations. So tell me, what was the white space for this book?
Well, transformations have been always part of the progression of economic value. When I discovered the experience economy way back when, as I like to use your phrase, because it was way back when, I discovered transformations at the same time. I was a strategic planner at IBM many years ago, and I asking what's next. And so I looked at that and said, just as if you create a great service that's so memorable for people, you turn it into an experience. If you create a great experience, it's exactly what this person needs at this moment in time, then you can't help but turn to what we often call a life-changing experience. Right? That's a transformation, where you use experiences as the raw material to guide people to change, to become who they want to become, to flourish as human beings. So it was there from the beginning. It was the last two chapters of the experience economy, but it's been 27 years since the experience economy was first published. Hard to believe that. Now in its third edition. Basically, people have been asking me since then, when are you going to write a full book on transformation? I said, well, two things. One, I don't know enough about it. And two, the world's not ready for it. And that's really what's changed, is I learned a lot about it. It took years to do that. I would often use it with clients in speeches, workshops, consulting, that the easiest way to think about transformations is any business that's in the business of helping people be healthy, wealthy, and wise is in the transformation business. So when I worked with healthcare, when I worked with financial services, when I worked with educational institutions and others, I'd always bring up transformations, but with no more information really than was in the original book. But I was doing more research on it, and I particularly once I finally decided that the was ready for it. Things there being the creation of the World Experience Organization, the WXO in London, which I co-founded, which was a matter of saying, I got a call, can we create this? Yes, please do. I want somebody to do this. Thank you. That was my co-founding. And they now I just got back from London a couple of weeks ago for the fourth summit that they've had on it now as part of London Experience Week. And from the first summit on, all these campfires we did online, it was very clear that all the experience designers that are part of this organization, which is a major subset of the membership, are really focused on transformative experiences. Like two-way person, someone I talked to, they want their experiences transformed, not just to entertain, not just to engage. And so it's one of those demarcation points, among others, that, hey, the world is ready for this. That's when I decided to do it in 2023 and started in January 2024, February in 2026, it was published.
Well, let's lay some groundwork for the listeners on what we exactly mean, because everybody can have a different concept of what we mean by transformation. So as it relates to the transformation economy, what are we talking about when we talk about transformation?
Yeah, transformation is an effectual outcome, right? That lasts, that's sustained through time. And let me contrast it with, let me say first that all transformation is identity change.
Interesting.
All transformation is identity change. You're either enhancing some level of identity or expanding some level of identity that you already have, some aspect of identity, I should say, or you're gaining a new aspect of identity, right? And which I often say is like, I was X, now I am Y. Right, as a way, I'm a math major, so I talk in parameters, right? So was X, now I was Y, right? There are transitions in state that don't rise to the level of a transformation. So if I cold, but now somebody helped me be warm. If I was hungry, I went to a restaurant, and now I am satiated. Right, those are transitions in state. Right, they don't last. They're not really an identity change, right? So it is a change in identity is the way to think about it. And again, it's built on top of experiences. We only ever change through the experiences we have. As the old saying goes, we're all the product of our experiences. You've got the nature of our DNA, and you got the nurture of the experiences that we've had in our lives that determine who we are. And for the most part, people have, there's a lot of happenstance involved in that, right? Intentional about what we're becoming. If you think about what spending, a large part of your day watching TikTok videos does to you as a person, right? It is changing you in some way. And are we thinking about that and understanding that and being more intentional? So more and more people are being intentional about their transformations. They've always experienced like all the economic offerings, commodity goods, services, experiences, transformations have always been around, but in the past, we're largely our own general contractor of the experiences, of the transformations that we want. And we have to, if we want to become more fit, we may choose to protein powder and organic produce at the commodities level. We may choose to buy self-help books and barbells at the goods level. or Fitbit watches. But at the service level, it's really the applications of the Fitbits and Apple Watches that give us data that we need to be able to figure out how things are going, how we want to improve. At the experience level, we may get a membership and a mission feed or membership feed experience at a gym, paying a monthly fee. At the transformation level, that maybe we hire a personal trainer that really sits on us and ensures that we do what we need and that we achieve our fitness aspirations. But it's much easier if we can go to one company and do all that, because there's a lot of that, protein powder sort of stuff that's not being very effective or doesn't help you as it might others. There may be other things that are better for you. The self-help books will only take you so far, and they're all written for a general audience and so forth. They can help you interpret the data. And that's increasingly what people are looking for, is somebody to say, just help me become who I want to be.
Okay. And you to go back to your math equation,
Yeah.
which is the extent of my mathematical abilities, is going from X to Y.
Right.
I assume Y. In the book, you talk about flourishing, right? So define flourishing. How does that all fit into this context?
Yeah, well, the human flourishing has gotten this renaissance over the last 25 years. I mean, it goes back to Aristotle, and actually you can point in the Bible to Proverbs and Psalms and where God would want his people to flourish. And it basically means that the way I define it in the book, there's a lot of people who have different measures of it, but I'd like to keep it simple, which is it's the extent to which you are who you are meant to be. And how can you become that, right? We're never, ever going to be ideals, right? We're aging and we all have issues and that sort of thing. But if we become more and more who we're meant to be, that's important. And it goes back to the healthy, wealthy, wise statement, that I expanded those into 4 spheres of transformation. It's not just about being healthy, but having health and well-being, right? Healthcare is a means to which well-being is a key element of flourishing. It's not just about wealthy, it's about having wealth and prosperity. Prosperity, I love the Hebrew word shalom, which obviously means peace, but as a greeting, it's have a good life, right? That's what prosperity is, a good life. And however much wealth you have, you can have a good life. And recognizing that the money is the means to that. And then wisdom is about knowledge. Wise is about knowledge and wisdom, that we gain knowledge through the experiences we have. We apply them into experience. Wisdom is the outcomes of that allows us to affect situations in our lives and others' lives in the world that for which money, knowledge is the means to being able to use that to know what knowledge to apply when. And there's the other sphere of transformation, as I call them, that wasn't thought of in that old English proverb, which is purpose and meaning. And that's core. It's core to human being, that we have meaning in our lives, that we need meaning in our lives, and doing things with purpose is a way to get that meaning. So if you have all those 4 things, right, then you're flourishing. If you can increase those extent to which the level of those 2, so that you do become more of who you're meant to be, then you'll flourish in your life. And what I discovered in the writing of the book, I didn't know this going in, fostering human flourishing is the raison d'etre of business. That it's why business exists in the world. And people decry capitalism, even though it's been the greatest force for good, for helping people, for getting them out of poverty into tremendous wealth. I mean, even the poorest people in this country live better than the wealthy people, hundreds of years ago. And that's because of that. But there are many ills of it as well. There are many market failures and other things. And a lot of those ills, a lot of greed in the market, a lot of trying to addict people to your applications and whatnot. And all of that, I think, can be traced to people, executives, boards, investors, not understanding that the reason they exist is to foster human flourishing. Nobody ever buys any offering unless they think it makes them better off in some way, of all 5 genres of offering. So they're willing to exchange the money in their account for your offering only if they think your offering provides more value to them than that money. And so you've got to figure out, how do you help in your business people to flourish in their lives across whatever dimensions make sense. And as a friend of mine, Stan Houston, likes to say, if your business doesn't help people flourish, then you're a racket.
Well, I love that. What I love about what you're saying is you're really reframing the purpose of business in general. At a sort of a more micro level, I look at customer experience management and say, I think a lot of times, because I had the opportunity to to teach at Michigan State for several years and also at Loyola previously. And even in the bank where I worked, we did orientation. I finished by saying, look, what we're talking here isn't just about getting better metrics on voice of the customer or survey results. It is, if we do this right, it means that we're making a difference in people's lives.
Beautiful.
Because if you take Starbucks as an example, and I go there way too often, to be honest, I'm sure there's a 12-step program for that.
Yeah, that's the transformation level of Starbucks at the experience level, is to wean yourself off of coffee.
So, the way that I get treated when I walk in, whatever it is, if I'm going to the counter, the way that person interacts with me, how clean the store is, how I feel about myself going through that experience and could affect the trajectory of my day.
Yep.
And that then affects the people that I interact with, that affects the people they interact with. So we're really talking, this is what I love about what you're talking at a broader scale and illuminating in this book, is that we're not just talking about making and selling a product here. We're talking, would you agree?
Yes. Actually, it's not just a product.
Right.
The product is basically a shorthand term for what more economically we call an economic offering, right? It's what you sell to others.
Mm-hmm.
And to recognize that it goes far beyond physical goods, which is generally what many people associate the word product with, and has opportunities for transformation. And even goods providers can offer transformations. I'm thinking of, Nicoderm CQ patches and Nicorette gum, right? People only ever buy those offerings if they want to transform from, again, the from to statement, from smoker to non-smoker. And they did a study that, many years ago and found that only 24% of the people who buy their products, their physical products, ever transform, ever quit smoking, right? Which is pretty pitiful. And so they put together a transformation program called MyQuit. You can go to myquit.com to learn about it, where they do a diagnosis up front about why do you want to quit smoking? What are the obstacles you have to overcome? When do you most crave a cigarette and so forth? And then they design an 8-week program, tips and inspiration every week, including a 24/7 hotline that you can call, right? If you really want to, like calling your sponsor in AA, right? I've got this cigarette, I got a lighter, talk to me. And when you go through that program, you have a 50% greater likelihood of quitting smoking. Now, 50% on top of 24% is only 36%, because quitting smoking is really hard. Many transformations are really hard, but 50% is a huge number in an increase when they think about it as a transformation rather than just the product that they're selling. So likewise, the way to think about it with whatever offering you have is to ask the old manufacturing technique, asking 5 whys, right? So they're buying your product. They want to buy your product. They bought your product, right? Why? Why do you want this product? Well, because of this. So, okay. Why do you want that? Well, because of this. Why do you want that? And get them to a conversation, how many whys it takes till they tell you some core aspiration, like, I'm buying this flowers, right? Because I want a better relationship with my wife, right? And so if you can go all the way and subsume the product within a transformation offering, like Nicorette gum subsumed into myquit.com, then you offer transformation. They don't charge for that. They should, right? And I think they do. If they did charge, they'd even do better, but it at least is a transformation program. But even if you only make it 2 or 3 whys into that sequence, you're more transformational. And that means you create more value, right? You create that greater likelihood that they achieve their aspiration, or you're an element in that general contracting of all the things that I need to do to be able to achieve that aspiration.
Sure, there's just so much there that you said that got my wheels going that I want to unpack, because that metaphor of trying to quit smoking, translates to all sorts of things. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, like, what do you see as, you mentioned one of the obstacles, but what do you see as the biggest obstacles to transformation actually working?
Yeah, there's a lot of issues. I would say the biggest obstacle for most transformations, there are some different types of transformations now, but for most transformation, the biggest obstacle, life happens. Why do so few people fulfill their New Year's resolution? Life happens, right? They have every intention. They sign up for a gym membership. They get all this stuff and they start doing it. They have every intention. The kids are bothering you. Work gets hard. You get a snowstorm and you don't go to the gym once, and it makes it easier not to go the next time. All these things, and that basically is what makes it hard. One of the key things that makes it hard to transform. That's where accountability. Adding accountability is a key thing. That's where having a company that's guiding it, instead of you being your own general contractor, where they're reminding you, hey, you really do this. Most gyms, for example, are definitely not in the transformation business, right? They're charging for the experience because they think their best customers are the ones that make New Year's resolutions, show up once and never come again, and they get all that membership money for free for a year. No, you have helped them absolutely zero. They came to you because they want to become more fit, and you basically, put your nose up at them. Instead of saying, hey, the first time you come, what's your aspiration? What do you really want to do? And how can we help you do that? Right. And then recognize, okay, and if they don't show up, then we're going to call you, right? We'll text you first. You don't respond. We're going to call you. We're going to have a conversation. And then the chances that you stick to it and achieve that New Year's resolution, achieve that aspiration, then go way up.
Yeah. And I personally relate to that. One of the obstacles that I experienced in banking, and it may be true for other industries, the first of 2 acquisitions in 3 years. So we were on the acquiring side, obviously. If you're being merged or being acquired, that's going to obviously affect whatever initiatives are in place. If you're even if you're on the acquiring side, look, a couple of things are realities. One is, you're merging 2 different cultures. 2 is the customers never asked to be your customers. They were the customer of the company
and their employees never asked to be your employees either.
100%. All this change is happening. And if you don't get your arms, if you don't start with that mindset, you can be down a very steep slope, slippery slope, right? So what I wanted to ask you was, in my work, I have found that one of the quiet disruptors of obstacle change is trust. And trust can stall projects, can stall initiatives. There are obviously the lack of. Have you found that to any degree in your research?
I mean, yes. Basically, if you've hired a transformation guider, right, someone to help you, and there's lack of trust there, then it just won't work, right? Trust is paramount to be able to do that. I mean, there's a level of authenticity and confidence and other things, but trust is key. Once that's and you go in assuming a certain level of trust, but you've got to build up on that as the transformation guider, and then one thing can just blow it up all in an instant if you lose that trust with them. So yes, I definitely agree with that. One of the things you bring to mind too, Mark, is one of the things I discovered in my research is that when I first thought about transformations, I thought about it as basically, the bluebird of happiness. It's on your shoulder, first in your ear, and say, oh, I want to become more fit, right? Or I want to become a better golfer, or I want to save more for retirement, whatever it might be. And one of the things I realized that a really large share of transformations, particularly the most major transformations, what I call metamorphosis, right? Metamorphosis is a change in wholesale identity and core identity where you can't go back even if you wanted to, right? That's a metamorphosis. Big word, but it's the right word. And a lot of metamorphoses happen because of trauma. And trauma, like I lose a loved one, I get divorced, I get fired. And what I realize is I get acquired by another company, right? As an employee, that's trauma.
Yeah.
And what trauma does is it immediately changes your identity, right? Downwards, right? Immediately changes your identity. I have this, I have cancer. I was cancer-free. Now I have cancer, right? That's sort of trauma. I was an employee of this company. Now I'm an employee of this company I never even knew. By the way, you could use this in your teaching in that. There's a famous video clip of David Letterman when NBC got bought by GE. And he goes into GE's offices and say, I'm a new employee. Just want to meet you folks at the it's unbelievable what happens. If you ever get a chance, look that up. So that's, it's a merger and acquisition issue. Trauma immediately changes. And the idea then is that you need to get back to whole. right? What you need the transformation guide to do is to get you back to whole. And if you think about the example of I have cancer, right? So you get a surgical team that does its level. You then get a different chemo team that does its level. You may have a family doctor, but you really need an oncologist. And one of the problems is these people don't talk to each other. And there's no one that's really guiding you through this. No one that you've spent enough time with, except maybe your family doctor, who's really not in control here, to gain that level of trust that you're talking about. And it makes that sort of thing very, very difficult. And so what you need in that situation is you need an advocate for this particular person. You need a guide. And I love that your podcast is now the trusted guide. We pull that back together. I realize now that's why you asked about trust, right? Because you need a trusted guide. The guide is the economic function. You guide transformation. You're a guider. And you need to have that guide. Now, there's many different things you can call it. It could be a coach, it could be a counselor, it could be an alchemist, I call it for metamorphosis, could be an advocate, a navigator, a guru, a Sherpa, a wizard, whatever it might be that fits your business. And that's what you need in that cancer situation, right? Just generally, there's nobody who's just focused on you that then is able to talk to the rest and understand what's best for you. So that trusted guide in any particularly metamorphic transformation, is a needed position.
Let me ask you this. As you think about, and I know a lot of your work is, I think about it as macro because you're talking about the economy, but
Right.
yet the illustrations in your book are very micro, really into the individual. In fact, you say in the book that it's really about individualization.
Right. That's the last thing I say in the book.
Yeah. But differentiate that from personalization.
Yeah. So first, there's personalization, there's customization, there's individualization. Right. So personalization is a subset of customization. My partner Jim Gilmore and I wrote an HBR article on this called "The Four Faces of Mass Customization," and it's a framework in the chapter 4 of the Experience Economy, chapter 5 maybe of the chapter 5 of the Experience Economy, and talks about 4 different types, of which personalization is one. Personalization is basically what we call cosmetic customization, right? Where you take something that's standard and you demographically understand something, you put their name on. You got a towel, you put their name on it. You've got a cup, and they upload an image and you put the image on it, right? That's personalization. Customization effectively means you're doing something for this individual living, breathing person, or an active corporeal entity if you're in B2B customization. It's not done in advance, it's done on demand. And that's what customization is. And that's why it's the DNA, Mass Customization being my first book. It's the DNA of the progression of economic value of everything I think about. How I discovered it is understanding customizing a good turns into service, customizing service turns into experience, customizing experience turns into transformation, which I talk about in chapter 1 of the book. So it's core to doing that. It also incorporates customization, percent of personalization, visualization, a superset of customization. Recognizes that also one of the things that happens as you go up this progression of economic value is you get more individual with the customer. Commodities, goods, services exist outside of us. There are these arm's length things that commodities we hardly ever touch and feel anymore. Goods and services, we generally want to be commoditized as much as possible, bought on price and convenience, so we spend as little time with them as possible. But experiences reach inside of us and engage us. Experiences happen inside of us as reaction to the events that are staged in front of us. So that's much more individual. Even if you're customizing the good and service, that's much more individual. Transformations are the most individual because they change us from the inside out. Right? You are not changing the customer. If you're changing the customer, then it's more than a racket. It's immoral, right? It's like slavery and sort of thing. But the customers change themselves, and you create the conditions under which they can change, right? So that's what's important about individualization is they're changing from the inside out in response to the guidance the trusted guidance that you give them.
So if we could just tease that concept out a little bit as it applies to change that you're trying to make within an organization, and let's just say that I don't know, you're a project manager, you are an IT manager, you're an HR manager, or you're a customer experience manager, and you're trying to make a change. You don't have a big team, and you're getting some resistance. So one of the things that I loved about your book was you get to talk about diagnosis and you get into really understanding the why And I'm wondering, as I'm thinking out loud, because some of the models that I've seen have talked about understanding the why. It's easy to, number one, assume that because CEO says we're going to do this, let's just say capture the hill, that you've got all the lieutenants on board. That would be potentially a huge mistake. And so I'm wondering if this process, as I think about it, is understanding the why, understanding the why at various perspectives or aspects of the key stakeholders that you need to help. Really, they're the ones going to be doing the change. You're just guiding it. You're not the hero. That's part of the whole guide hero thing. They are the hero.
They're the hero.
Does this fit into your research and your understanding as to maybe an approach that someone would take who's trying to make change within an organization where they don't have all this positional authority?
Right. Yes. And it's a matter of understanding that you actually have multiple constituencies, not actual customers, but at least constituencies. You need to understand the why of each one. You need to understand how the change you want to make helps them do their jobs better. And if it doesn't help them do their jobs better, and there may be certainly situations where that's the case, right? Where we're doing this for different reasons, then you need to make sure they understand the reasons and why this is for the greater good. How do you do all that understanding? Recognize transformations only happen through experiences. Only happen through experiences. So often we try to give them just information, which is the service level, send them reports, do a presentation, and so forth. No, you need to get them to viscerally feel this and how it matches their why and what they're trying to accomplish. And ideally, not just the why of whatever this particular thing is, but I'll say it's the big W why, which is the purpose. What is their purpose as an individual person, which hopefully is aligned with the purpose of the corporation. And one of the things I recommend, and this makes whatever these changes easier too, is that every company or business unit within a company should have its own meaningful purpose for why it exists in the world, that leads to human flourishing, right? Because that then gets inside of people's minds and they recognize, hey, I'm doing this for that what I'm doing actually has an impact on the world. And on individual customers and how that then impacts the world from there. And that makes change so much easier because you say, are we going in the direction that our meaningful purpose is that over time, at least everybody accepts when you uncover it and promulgate it. And if yes, then I can see why we're doing it. That's the right thing to do. But if it's not, right, then you got that disconnect and then you're going to have problems, but then you got to see how do I get all of this to align? How do I get this project, whatever it is that you're talking about, that hill that you want to capture, aligned with the greater battle of what we're trying to do, aligned with the war that we're having, to just extend the metaphor you started a little bit, and how that aligns with each individual person's purpose. It's why the military service in general, and the U.S. Army in particular, is one of the greatest transformation guiders in the world. Almost accepting none. I would put the U.S. Army as the number one transformation guide. I never put it that way before. I'm going to have to remember that, right? The number one.
You heard it first on the Trusted Guide podcast.
Right. They do it by getting people in platoons to trust each other, to uphold each other, to do whatever it takes for them. And then at platoon level, then they get to know what the mission is. And part of that mission is ensuring that they never let down their buddies. That's the key. They never let down their buddies. They do everything they can, help that mission because they're doing everything they can for that. And that's the sort of alignment that you want to have.
Implicit in what you just shared and you reminded me is to me, what I'm hearing is there's a bridge. There's a bridge between first understanding, and sometimes this is going slow to go fast. Yep. It's first understanding what their why is, not just what they're saying on the surface, but maybe a little bit deeper. What's their philosophical reason for doing what they're doing? What is their belief in the way things ought to be and the way things should be? And how can you connect that? Because it's not impossible. How you can connect that to this other corporate mission and the reason for change. And in this case, whatever the outcome is, could be the improved customer experience, whatever the outcome is. And if you can bridge that, but until you've bridged that gap, you could, if you ignore it or if you assume it down the road, it could come back to bite you, right?
Right. And bridging that gap, Mark, creates trust, right? what can you think of more than be able to share at that level with someone and then knowing that they're using that in the right way?
Yeah. Well, I just love this conversation. Could talk to you all day, but I want to have you back for your next book. What I'm going to ask, because you said you're always thinking about what's next, and
Yeah.
in the back of the book, in the back of each section, you include reflections, and what I love about that too is you say inherent in the success of any transformation is follow through, not just follow up, right? And just explain that, and then tell me about what's next.
Yeah. There's basically three phases in any transformation. You mentioned diagnosis before, right? Diagnosis: who is this customer? What do they want to become, right? And then you develop that from to statement. You have a generic from to statement that you have for your business, but every individual is different, right? It's getting at their core way of why they want to quit smoking, for example, which differs for other people. And if it's a health thing, it's different than if it's a family thing, right? Which gets much more emotional about, so forth.
Mhm.
So then you have the set of experiences that you undergo. It's generally not monotonically increasing. Generally, it's never monotonically increasing. There's always ups and downs. There's always regress as well as progress. And you have to be able to sense and respond to that and help people recover from things that they need to stay on track. And then that's where, and most transformation guys think, okay, that's it, job's done, right? But no, you need follow through. Right? Follow through, which is ensuring that the transformation takes hold, that it's sustained through time. Right? If I go through a committed quitters program and after 8 weeks I stop smoking, but 3 weeks later I light up again, I wasn't truly transformed. Right. And they have no follow through on that. Right. So it's follow through that you need to have that sustains the transformation through time. It's one of the key characteristics of transformations as an economic offering, that it's sustained through time. So that's follow through. What's next? It depends on what you mean by that, Mark. If you mean what's the next economic offering and the progression of economic value, the answer is there isn't one. There is, and so there's this. Explain why. There's this. I always say that transformations are the fifth and final economic offering, because we got this heuristic where customization is the antidote to commodization. Right? Commodization drags you down year after year. If you do nothing else, then eventually you'll become a commodity where people buy you just based on price and convenience. Customization lifts you up. You can't help but be differentiated, i.e. not a commodity, if you're working with individual customers on exactly what they want. And again, that's how I discovered each of these progressions. So I looked at that heuristic because I did ask what next from back originally, way back when. I asked what's next after transformations and decided, well, one is that you can't commoditize transformations in the same way. You can commoditize the individual experiences that lead up to a transformation, but you can't commoditize them in the same way, because with transformations, the customer is the product. It's the change customer that's the actual outcome. Outcome being a key word for transformation. It's the outcome of the offering, of the product, if you will. And you can't commoditize human beings. Rebel against the notion of selling body parts or selling our bodies for sex and so forth. Right? We recognize that that's not right, even though it is attempted. And then what happens when you customize an offering, a transformation? I thought, well, if design exactly the right transformation for exactly this person, what would that be in that way? And the only thing I can come up with is that it would be perfecting human beings, so they have no need of more transformation, right? Otherwise, it's just transformations all the way to the end. And that's not the province of mankind. That's the province of God, right? God's the only one who can perfect us, sanctify us. So that's for that reason there isn't. And also there's 5 ways you charge for. I had every once in a while somebody tries to convince me there's a 6th economic offering, and a woman did this a couple, 3 years ago, I remember. And finally I said, it's just a different form of transformation. And I said, okay, well, tell me what you would charge for differently, right? Then, because you are what you charge for. If you charge for undifferentiated stuff, you're in the commodities business. If you charge for tangible things, you're in the goods business. If you charge for the activities your people perform, you're in the service business. And you're in the experience business economically, if and only if you charge for time, the time customers spend with you, which is either admission fee, membership fee, or some other way of doing that. With transformations, you're in the transformation business economically, if and only if you charge for the demonstrated outcomes your customers achieve, right? Because the customer is the product. Inputs don't matter, only outcomes. And she couldn't find another way to charge for it. I said, okay, well, come back to me when you find some sixth way of charging. So that's the other reason why Transformations is the fifth and final economic offering.
Yeah. And if you get the book, and it's the Transformation Economy, and I'll have a link in the show notes, he walks through different ways that you can charge for outcomes, different based on the research. I have one question that I should have asked earlier, but I don't want to leave because I'm thinking, if I'm a listener, and I thought about it even in the first book, that I got to ask, and I don't necessarily personally have an objection, but I do want to ask that question in the audience, and that is, so I'm going to Amazon and I click and I buy more coffee or a widget, a box of paper clips. And let's just say I'm a widget manufacturer and I supply the widgets that go into an engine that goes into an aircraft or something down the road. How am I being transformed? Do I have an emotional connection to this? How's my identity going to change? What would you say to that person?
No, it's not. There may be accumulation of things, but no, right? Not everything is a transformation. Not everything leads to a transformation. But I will say, but what you did do is enhance your flourishing at least a little bit with each one, right? Again, all economic offerings do that. Amazon, and I'll throw in Walmart and I'll throw in McDonald's in there, are some of the greatest forces for human flourishing in the world. Why? Because they commoditize things. They commoditize goods and services. They get you to the point where you can buy them at the least possible price and the greatest possible convenience, which frees up your time and your money. So you can spend your hard-earned money and your hard-earned time on the experiences that you value, that offer time well spent versus time well saved. And then even those transformative experiences, the transformations that offer time well invested, where you're investing your time and becoming better off. So they give you more money and they give you back time that you wouldn't have, that enables you to flourish in all these other ways.
Oh, there you have it. There you have it. All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I so enjoyed the book, The Transformation Economy, and having you back on the show.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Trusted Guide podcast. If this conversation resonated with you, you can find more episodes at empoweredcx.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're leading change without formal authority, you're not alone in that work. I'll see you next time.